All right. Well, thank you everyone for your interest in this topic. I have tried to kind of hybridize a couple of different presentations. Um, these are aimed at both the professional pest control applicator as well as a homeowner or business person who might be contacting an extension agent for some help with what they think is a fairly minor rodent infestation. So you'll see that kind of diverse perspective on different aspects of commensal rodent control throughout the presentation. So it's going to be very dense, and with that, I will get started. I am the chair of the Rodenticide Task Force. We, let's see, oh, I'm not advancing again. Um, there we go. All right. So we comprise 13 of the rodenticide manufacturers. Um, this presentation is part of our stewardship program. And we not only do we educate about responsible uses of rodenticides, but we also provide a wealth of background and technical expertise in rodent control in general. And so our objectives are to maximize the effectiveness of rodenticides and minimize non-target impacts, as well as to focus on maximizing public health and food safety. A quick overview of today's presentation. Why are commensal rodents a concern? Then we'll go through basic rodent traits of those commensal species. We'll spend some time on species identification because that's very important. And then we're going to spend a fair amount of time on IPM principles with the control methods nested within that framework. So first, why are rodents in structures not okay? So they carry diseases, parasites, they shed fur wherever they go, and in some cases, particularly mouse urinary proteins, as well as the fur, they create an environment where sensitive individuals can develop allergies. They, of course, contaminate food. They also, with their gnawing, cause damage to electrical wiring, which can lead to fires. They damage communication cables, goods and furniture, damage to the structures themselves. And also, a really important aspect of rodent damage is they do get into vehicles and cause damage. So a quick look at rodent diseases and parasites. We'll have some disgusting pictures here. Rodents are actually responsible for more human illnesses and death throughout history than any other group of mammals. And of course, the plague outbreaks in Europe and the Middle East and Asia, which went on for century after century, certainly gives rodents one of the sort of big names in this category. And here is a short list of some of the many diseases that are vectored by rodents and their parasites. And of course, recently we saw the very tragic outcome of the hantavirus that caused the death of Gene Hackman's wife. So rodents in structures really need to be taken seriously. Oh, that's a little shot of some tapeworms in a rat that was captured from a urban residential area. Here is a very, very just a sample of the many publications that have surveyed rodent species recently and found a number of different viruses and parasites and bacteria that they carry. So with that, let's get into the biology of rodents. So their general traits are a high reproductive rate. They explore their environment. Some are able to travel long distances. They tolerate a wide range of conditions, which has allowed them to spread out from their original native habitats and basically colonize just about every corner of the planet. The omnivorous or the commensal species are omnivorous. They're quite flexible in what they will eat. And of course, they are always gnawing, and wherever they go, they spread feces, urine, and their saliva. So here are 5 species that we will quickly go through. And even though the vole is not technically a commensal species, as we will see shortly, it is around homes in some areas, and it is part of making sure that you are identifying the correct species before you get started with your rodent control. So we will go through each of these, starting with the house mouse. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through this list in detail. And likewise with the deer mouse, they also are in and around homes. So they are an important species to be able to identify when possible. And of course, as we just referred to, the important issue with the deer mouse is that they are a common carrier of hantavirus. Here are some images of voles and kind of what their preference is in suburban areas in yards where they can be a nuisance to homeowners. Here's a quick look at the vole distribution. And since Dana covered voles last week, I'm not going to spend any time on the different species. So here are the 3 small rodent species side by side. And the main point here is that when targeting a small rodent with a rodenticide product, it's important to know which species you're dealing with and whether that species is on the rodenticide product label. So we'll go through the 2 main rat species in the US, and those are the Norway rat and the roof rat. And one of the important aspects of the roof rat is they do come in a variety of color types. So they can be charcoal black, as is the one that's climbing on the wall, or they can be different shades of gray or even kind of an agouti with different patches of reddish brown. And they can have white bellies or gray bellies or uniformly that dark black color. Here's a quick side by side of the roof rat, the Norway rat, And also an important aspect of rodent identification is the more tricky aspect of being able to tell the difference between a juvenile rat and a house mouse. So young rats are kind of like Labrador puppies. They have very large feet compared to their body size, and that's usually a pretty good giveaway that you're dealing with a young rat versus a house mouse, where its feet size and head size will be in proportion to the body. All right, very important aspect of identifying what kind of rodent you have is that you may actually not ever see the rodent itself, but you will almost certainly see the droppings that are left behind. So mouse droppings are very small, and then it is actually quite easy with a bit of practice to tell the difference between Norway rat droppings and roof rat droppings. And in the picture on the right, all three species of rodents droppings are in this picture. So you often will get multiple species co-occurring in a really bad infestation. So you need to be able to pick out the mouse droppings and the two different rat species. Um, so reproduction, we're gonna just pull up a little video here of Mama Mouse pulling one of her 6 babies who went a little rogue on Mama and came running out from under the stove in this residential kitchen where the mouse had made her nest. So this infestation started with the individual pregnant female mouse getting into the house, and the residents in the house were hoping she would go away, but instead she had a litter of 6, which is on the high end for mice. But now that mouse infestation got a foothold in this particular house. And if left unchecked, as you can see, that the mature young can start reproducing fairly quickly. And similarly with roof rats tend to be a warmer habitat species, but not necessarily. They are found in Vancouver, British Columbia, and some other more northern areas in North America. But they tend to follow a reproductive cycle of breeding that peaks in the summer and early fall. Um, and then also similarly with Norway rats, again, to take advantage of the seasonal abundance of resources that happens in summer and early fall. House mouse diet. So again, keep in mind that these commensal species are going to take advantage of just about any food resource that they find. They may have preferences, but they are not going to pass up anything. Mice are notorious for being able to survive with very little water in their food. Then with rats, and I'm sort of lumping roof rats and Norway rats a bit together here. They also are very omnivorous and they can survive quite well even if you remove human sources of food. They, both species will eat other animals in the area, including birds and insects and plants. And in gardens and agriculture, of course, they will feed on a wide variety of what's available. And in landscaping, they can do a lot of damage to landscaping plants. This, for example, is an ornamental palm, which was completely killed by roof rats up in the canopy, eating through the apical meristem. Um, then we'll move on to a quick overview of behavior. So mice tend to make very small excursions, and they are, of course, notorious for squeezing through very small spaces where you would never expect them to be able to get through, which is important when we get to the exclusion part of rodent control. Roof rats will travel considerable distances in their foraging and looking for mates. They tend to like to grab their food and then seek shelter in another location. So if you're outdoors or even in a structure, you may find what's called a husking station, where you'll find what they've been eating and taken to that particular location. Roof rats are generally solitary, and an important behavioral trait of roof rats is they are very neophobic. Um, so we're gonna pull up Bandit, who is a domesticated pet roof rat. And Bandit's just gonna cruise around while we go quickly through some of the statistics that are known about roof rat foraging behavior from studies in the wild. So as you can see, they can have pretty large home range sizes, and they can travel pretty far in looking for food or mates. So that's a really important aspect to keep in mind. Norway rats are generally colonial, so they tend to stay pretty close to their food resources and stay within their colonies. And Norway rats also have a tendency towards neophobic behavior, which we will cover shortly. With roof rats especially, it is very important to keep in mind their capabilities of climbing. They can go straight up the inside of uncovered vertical pipes, and they can also quite handily climb up very slippery seeming vertical pipes and conduits. They also have an amazing ability to jump. I had a little video clip in here which malfunctioned, but which shows a roof rat jumping probably 5 or 6 feet vertically up in the air, trying to get at a lure, to illustrate that. So they are going to easily be able to jump between a tree branch and get onto a roof, and then from there potentially make their way into a structure from above. All right, we will quickly go through some introductory slides here on the principles and steps of integrated rodent management, which essentially follows IPM with a few modifications. So before we start on this, here are some sort of basic traits of commensal rodents to keep in mind. I like to say that we are living in an infinite sea of rodents. No matter where you are surrounded by rodents. So because of their high reproductive rate and their constant ability to explore and colonize, they will reinvade. So here are some kind of basic points to keep in mind. Rodents usually don't disappear on their own. So referring back to the mama mouse and her baby, that hope of the residents of the home that the mouse would just go away didn't really work out. Reproduction will occur, and new rodents will enter an area. So unless something is changed about a structure or its immediate area, you can assume that even when the existing rodents are removed, new ones will come in. All right, so with IPM for rodent control, it's based on the understanding of the habitat use and population dynamics of the rodent pest. So timing of the control is very important. You're looking at the breeding cycle, the season, the availability of other food, and whether all of these conditions are continuous. Location of control. So depending upon the nature of the structure and the rodent infestation, the type of control is going to be a spot treatment, or it can be around the exterior perimeter of the structure, or locations inside within the structure. So all of this depends upon monitoring. Monitoring gives the essential information to feed into your site-specific rodent control plan, and conditions will change. So you always have to be adaptable with your commensal rodent control approach. So here are the steps of IPM for rodent control. Monitoring the rodent populations and or the damage that they're causing, then evaluating the available control methods, giving consideration, of course, to the environment. And the environment, in this case, encompasses everything from the human element to what the non-target species are outdoors, depending upon where the rodent infestation is. And then implementing the selected methods, and then again, monitoring the target pest, non-target species, and the pest damage to determine the effects of the methods. So we'll go into some more details on that. And we're going to step it down into best management practices for rodent control, which tells you how to implement that IPM framework. So first, you need the accurate identification of the species to the best of your ability. Then looking for the rodent activity hotspots, and that will lead you to, excuse me, sanitation and exclusion, and evaluating whether you need to be concerned about non-targets. Then there's also the human element of rodent control. And then there are two lethal control methods that would be evaluated. So those would be mechanical, or if the decision is to go with a rodenticide. So we will start with, let me just go back. We're looking at the accurate identification of the species and how do you figure out where your hotspots are. So it goes without saying, of course, that rodent droppings are a good indication, but there are some more subtle signs potentially to look for. and those are these rub marks, especially rats tend to be nasty, greasy things. So if they are traveling back and forth a lot, they will leave these very telltale, very visible rub marks. And once you kind of become aware of what a rub mark looks like, you will be horrified to see, where you see those in your, as you go about your everyday um, errands and going in and out of businesses. All right, gnawing is another one that may be subtle, but may not be subtle. If you leave your package of Ritz crackers out on the kitchen counter overnight and you come back and find this the next morning, um, that's a hot spot. And then this is probably more suited towards the professional pest control person, but some homeowners may like to take on the challenge. And I've had um, people set up their Ring or doorbell cameras or some other types of cameras and really get into trying to figure this out on their own. But these cameras can be really useful at determining what rodent species it is and how it's getting in. All right, so moving on to sanitation. Um, there are some pretty obvious elements of sanitation, which you would hope would be kind of no-brainers, but not always. Um, and then looking around the structure, especially if it's a residential area, yards can harbor a lot of rodent activity. So looking for signs of rodent nests is very important. And then there are some um, activities that people love to do, which are just asking for rodent problems. And those, of course, are feeding of birds and cats outdoors. Um, and then compost bins are also kind of a notorious rodent attractant. So those need to be placed carefully and rodent proofed in such a way that they are fully enclosed and not able to be gotten into. Um, for exclusion, exclusion is generally pretty basic. You're looking to surround the structure with impermeable barriers, which are kept free of vegetation. And that, again, thinking back to roof rats, climbing and jumping abilities, you don't want trees with overhanging branches around the structure. And then it's very important to cover all conduits and vent openings and any access to crawl spaces. Those are all very common ways that rodents can enter structures. And of course, recognizing that old structures um, tend to have a lot of complexity and hidden holes. Um, it's not always easily possible to completely rodent-proof a structure. So again, with exclusion, it's a ever-changing challenge. So the site needs to be inspected regularly for new entries. Rodents will always find a way in if they can. They will chew through the corner of the wood deck, as you see on the left, or they will take advantage of vegetation growing up at the intersection between the bricks and the cement. So this ivy vine is hiding a fairly large burrow entrance where the rodents chewed through some of the brick material to make their way in. So we will do a quick run through of some of the basic control methods. And in this picture, there are live traps, snap traps, rodenticide baits, and glue boards. So when undertaking trapping, the very first aspect of it is to have a plan to dispose of dead or live rodents. And the individual doing the control needs to make sure that they protect themselves by wearing gloves and a mask. And that if you have a live rodent in a trap, or unfortunately, sometimes even lethal traps like snap traps won't kill the rodent. You might catch a foot or a tail. So then you have a very active live rodent, which you intended to kill in a snap trap. So in that event, you need to be prepared that you are going to need to euthanize that individual. So that should be part of your plan. You never want to be surprised in the event that that happens. And then if you are going to live trap, you need to look up the wildlife regulations in the area and have a plan in advance of what you're going to do with that live rodent, whether you are going to release it, and be aware of the potential for what happens when you release a live rodent. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but all of that should be part of your trapping plan. All right, again, species identification is very important because if you have a rat and you put out a mouse trap, that's not going to work. And if you have a mouse and you put out a rat trap, that's also not going to work. There are many, many different designs of snap traps and different locations and ways to set those traps, which take advantage of the rodent species and the rodent behavior. That can get pretty complicated, so we won't go into much detail on that. Non-targets are an issue for any type of trap. So for snap traps, it's really essential to put the trap in a location where non-targets cannot get at it. So bait stations are often designed for placing a snap trap inside them. If you see a black box or any of the commercial bait stations, you can't necessarily assume that it only contains a rodenticide bait. It may contain a snap trap that it is protecting from anything other than the rodent. And of course, here's an example of what can happen if a snap trap is just placed outdoors in the open. It is pretty common to catch birds in unprotected snap traps, as well as glue boards. Here's just a real quick overview of one of the methods for trapping indoors. And again, you're going to want to be very careful to make sure there are not non-targets inside, like pets and children. So These placements would be done in areas that do not have children and pets, but it's very effective to place two snap traps side by side up against a wall. All right, so moving on to what goes into the effective use of rodenticides within an IPM baiting program. So again, it's a dynamic process that repeats and adapts based on rodent activity. So you're going to want to do your rodent abundance assessment, your monitoring, and then with rodenticides, if it's a larger treatment site, you're going to want to map out carefully what area you're going to cover. Again, keeping in mind the foraging distances and behaviors of the particular rodent species being targeted. And then again, adjust your station spacing or your rodent placement, rodenticide placement based on that. And the frequency of restocking bait is also very important. So just quickly going through some basic principles here. Inadequate numbers of bait stations will decrease the likelihood that a rodent will enter a bait station while it is foraging. So here's an illustration of stations that are placed too widely. The different colored polygons are the home ranges of those rodent species. And you can see most of those stations are not going to get a visit. If you add more stations into the area, now you've got better coverage where you have multiple stations within the foraging range of those individual rodents. We're gonna take a quick look at neophobia in a roof rat. So he's investigating and he just doesn't like that station. Neve Quinn at University of California has done a lot of really solid research exploring this, and her results have shown that there are some individuals who will never enter a bait station. And in some cases, they can make up a pretty high proportion of the roof rat population in that area. Which is why monitoring of the rodent population is so important, because you will have a lot of bait stations where there's no take, and no bait take does not mean that there are no rats in that area. And then it is also really important to continually monitor and restock the bait stations because, again, the rodent populations are dynamic. So as the dominant individuals within a population are eliminated over a short time frame, if that bait station is cleaned out, then new individuals or less dominant individuals entering the area we'll find an empty bait station. But again, so monitoring and making sure that the bait station, as directed on the label, contains an uninterrupted supply of fresh bait addresses that dynamic population issue. With that, one of my all-time favorite movies is Mouse Hunt, which illustrates how frustrating rodent control can be. So it's, I think, important if you're dealing with a amateur person who is trying to do their own rodent control, they may be at a point where they should consider calling a professional, because rodent control can be challenging it can be gross, it can be very frustrating, and it can, and often does, take a lot of time. So here are some of the factors to help people consider when making that decision, because, recognizing that professional rodent control can be expensive, and people may not want to look at that option. But if there are too many rodents in their situation, if it's a stubborn infestation and they've been trying and they're not getting a handle on it, or if they continually or often have new rodents coming into the structure, or the surrounding area, that's probably also a sign to have a professional help figure out that reinvasion issue. And then, of course, when health and safety are a concern, that's also a good reason to consider a professional. And then people are squeamish, which is completely understandable. They may not want to see a live rodent. They may not want to deal with a dead rodent. So once someone has called a professional and is looking at trying to figure out with the professional how to address concerns about children, pets, and wildlife, this is often a really important aspect of the interview process for hiring a professional. And from the professional's perspective of customer service, these are really important points to go through with the customer when designing a control plan. So what are the risks? Children, pets, wildlife. And then what control method is going to address those concerns as well as be appropriate for the situation. And then again, keeping in mind the use of IPM, there should always be monitoring of both the target rodent population as well as monitoring for non-target issues. And it's extremely important that there is emergency support, really regardless of what control method is being used. So if the professional puts out a snap trap and it catches a rodent, but it's not dead, or if it is dead, the customer still needs to be able to contact the professional applicator pretty quickly. So, and that's also especially important when rodenticides are being used. This is just a very brief summary of rodenticide baits, because we're coming near the end here. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but they come in many different types of formulations. Obviously, they need to be used according to the label. And we'll just briefly go through the different types of active ingredients of rodenticides. So, and this is also important when a consumer is looking at a product and they may call with questions about the product. So obviously there are a wide variety of different types of general use pesticides that are available to the consumer. And those can only be used within and around structures. Again, the label of the product will explain that. So Here is a very quick summary. I'm sure probably almost all of you are quite familiar with the different categories, but the first generation anticoagulant rodenticides were developed in the early 1950s. They inhibit blood clotting, and they need to be ingested multiple times for the rodent to accumulate a lethal dose. So this is, again, where making sure that there is sufficient bait for the rodents in that population to be able to have access to multiple feedings over multiple days. And the antidotes for the first generation anticoagulants is vitamin K1. For the second generation anticoagulants, these products are more potent. They were developed in the 1970s in response to resistance to the first generation compounds. And these products are only intended for use by professionals or in agricultural structural settings. So consumers are strongly discouraged from using these products on their own. Then there are these three acute or non-anticoagulant rodenticide compounds. There's bromethalin, cholecalciferol, and zinc phosphide. None of these compounds have an antidote. In the case of a accidental ingestion of either a pet or a person, they need to be gotten to medical care right away to treat the symptoms. All right, I will just very quickly go through the sections of a professional label for structural. They are all basically based off of the same template that EPA reviews. So you're not going to find too much variation other than the actual application rate for that particular product based on its weight. So they all have these statements on the labels, and it's extremely important for either the professional or the customer of the professional to be aware. We do get, unfortunately, a lot of calls from homeowners who are wondering if their professional is applying the bait the right way. So let's see. And then this is a really sort of basic best practice of disposing of unused bait or bait that has been changed out of a station. I'm not going to go into field labels. Burrow baiting is a category that is generally only done by professionals. And it is targeting usually Norway rats around structures and in landscaping adjacent to structures. And there are only 3 types of formulations that can be applied this way, and that application method of burrow baiting must be on the label. So if you see loose blocks tossed out in the open, that is a serious label violation, and no one should be doing that. So here's just some best practices for applying burrow baits. And again, there's lots of emphasis within the IPM framework of monitoring, visiting the area frequently to check for issues, to monitor, to make sure that the bait is being effective at reducing activity, and then monitoring because these burrow colonies are especially prone to recolonization and reinfestation. Here's just a quick sampling of some common issues with bait misapplications. So bait should never be casually tossed behind things like refrigerators or up in attic crawl spaces, because at some point it can be translocated by rodents, or somebody's going to move the appliance not knowing that there was bait placed behind it, and so on. So here are just some illustrations of those common do nots. And then here's why it's so important to regularly check the treatment area to check for issues. Bait can be pulled out of the station, especially if it's not secured in the station properly. Bait stations can get damaged. And non-targets can also be an issue with interfering with bait stations. So here's an example of bait getting pulled out of the station. And then it's also very important to be vigilant and check the area for carcasses. It's not all that often that rodent carcasses are found out in the open, but it should be a regular part of when the treatment site is visited to restock the bait stations. As part of that visit, there should be just that look for carcasses. And you never want to bury rodents or the bait. Those should always be properly disposed of in a trash receptacle, secured. So here's just an example of that rare occasion when you find a rat just dead out in the open. So we also strongly urge professional applicators to, when an account is no longer active, they should be responsible for going back to the site, even if they've been let go by the customer. They need to explain how important it is that they have access to the site to be able to retrieve their bait and bait stations. Just a real quick review for the professional applicator as they're placing out bait stations. The complete picture of an IPM framework is very important. So they need to go through all aspects of the IPM framework with the customer. That includes sanitation, exclusion, and then going through with the customer where the placements are of traps and or bait stations or other rodenticide placements. And then going through so that the customer knows how to notify them and what types of situations the customer should immediately notify the applicator. It's also very important for the customer to know and for the professional applicator to know who to call in the event of a pet or human exposure. And here are 3 of the main resources who have that information. And of course, if the rodenticide label is available, the manufacturer can also always be called as well. I just have a few slides on this very important aspect, but because we are pretty much out of time, I think I am going to just close us out there and take a few questions.
Thanks so much, Katie, for all that great information. We do have a few questions in the chat. If you could stay on for just a few minutes to answer those.
I do.
Okay, awesome. Okay, let's see. What is the best way to
My internet
dispatch?
just got glitchy. Are you still able?
Yes, it looks like your video is frozen, but we can still hear you. Maybe try going off camera. That may help. Okay, in the meantime, I am going to drop the feedback link in the chat. So that is just a quick Google survey with 4 questions. Just let us know any remaining questions you have, anything else that you want to see, and I will make sure to get that feedback to Katie and the rest of the team. Katie, are you still with us? Okay, well, I'll give her just a little bit more time to see if she's able to come back and join us. But I also received a few questions about the recording and the slides. So just to let everyone know, I will be sending out the recording and the slides and any other materials and websites that Katie would like to share out to everyone who registered. So be looking for that this week. And if you missed any of the last webinars, those are also posted, so I will be linking to those. This was our last webinar, but we had 3 more before that. Okay, it looks like that Katie, her internet failed her just at the last moment. So I'll go ahead and close this out. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And thank you so much if you've joined for any other time in the series. We're so happy with the engagement and the turnout. So like I said, be looking for the follow-up email, and I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, Melanie.